Hi, we're College Critics. We did a project that was answering questions based on college scorecards from the Department of Education.
We thought about questions answering about do institutions with graduating debt tend to have higher graduating income? Do institutions with higher faculty salary tend to have higher levels of completion? Do institutions with higher acceptance rates tend to have higher levels of debt on graduation? For the data cleaning process, we had some issues, many null values. Some schools do not provide certain data, no metadata on year. Variable were unclear and poorly named.
Cool, and the tools we used were Python. We used NumPy for basic calculations and Pandas to create the graphs that we could study for our information. And the classification, we only classified based on earnings in our graphs, and what we did was we created 3 tiers: below $30,000 after 6 years, between $30,000 and $75,000 after 6 years out of school, and above $75,000. The only real obvious things that we saw were that those students that attended universities with little to no debt had a higher level of income range, whereas those with a higher level of debt had a lower level of income range.
For the knowledge gained, we can see that salary giving to teachers versus completion rate is correlated. There's a relation, as we can see, the blue representing the most recent data. For the acceptance versus debt, there's no obvious relation, as we can see random data everywhere. Completion versus debt, we see a little bit of relation there, but we cannot judge from what we have.
So this is very interesting. We were able to look at the national data versus CU Boulder's data. And so we were able to see for both the mean debt and mean earnings for both of them. The CU Boulder, we have a higher amount of debt, but we also have a higher amount of earnings than the national. And we can also see very directly when the recession was here in 2008, earnings went down for both the national and CU, and debt went up. And you can see that right here. And it hit the national level hard, but it hit CU Boulder very hard, which is right here. So we can also look at teacher salary and completion rates. So for the national data and for CU, we can see that there's a constant trend of teacher salary throughout the years, where CU Boulder, we actually have a higher salary than the national average ever was, so in 1995, we can see that right there is about the same as where we are in 2015 for the national data. And also for completion rates, we have kind of no pattern, while CU Boulder, we have a constant trend. And also CU Boulder, our lowest completion rate is at what the highest national has ever been.
So what can we do with this information? What we wanted to do was kind of like help people choose what schools to attend based on these statistics. We wanted to decide how much debt is reasonable for a student to acquire and expect a certain amount of income. Unfortunately, although our graphs did show some promising data, there was a lot of lack of response. Only 69% of the schools that released data about debt. So we tried to do something with that. 68% of that, 68% of schools had an average debt of below $15,000, so a 0.68 support. And then the confidence that we found was 0.08 for schools with below $15,000 of debt and above $30,000 of earnings, which would get you out of that first tier, the lowest tier that we found of income. Then we kind of ran into a roadblock after that, because most of the other variables we found only had about a 28% response rate for things like completion rate. So we still tried to work with it. We found the support of this completion rate was about 0.54 of schools had above a 50% graduation rate, which we think is acceptable. Half of your students are graduating at least. And then of those schools, confidence level of 0.19 when you have a school that has above 50% graduation rate and an earning rate that is above that first tier. Another thing that we noticed is that in all of these variables, debt and graduation rate, the median was reported instead of the mean, and we think that was to promote a lower level of debt just so that the schools would look better in America.